Hello and welcome to this episode of the Sticky Note Marketing Show. I'm your host, Mary Czarnecki, and today I'm thrilled to introduce you to our guest expert, Seth Donlin. So Seth is a marketing and communications coach with over 20 years of experience in storytelling and strategic brand building. And today we are going to be digging into a very important topic that is near and dear to a lot of business leader, business owner hearts out there, which is how do I get more visibility? How do I build my personal brand and create this authority platform? And Seth is here to share some very important elements about building a true, strong platform, including how you can use guesting on podcasts to help build that platform and how to tell more effective, more engaging, highly connective stories. So Seth, thank you for being here. So excited that you're a guest here on our show.
Oh, thanks for having me, Mary. I'm super excited to be on the show. You've had some great guests on before it, so I'm ready to become one of them.
Fantastic. I know there are already probably people listening and watching this episode who are familiar with you, but for those who are meeting you here for the first time, would you mind telling us a little bit about who you work with and what you do in your business?
Sure, I work with primarily coaches and consultants and other service providers, financial advisors, people of that sort, that are looking to really stand out in their industry in a way that they haven't to date. They're experts in their field, they're fantastic at what they do, and they're looking to up level their visibility, up level the kind of understanding that people in their field and people that are looking for others like them, up leveling the understanding that people have of them.
Fantastic. And you have had a lot of success with podcast guesting, and now you're helping others actually use that as a platform, a tool to gain that visibility. But I also know firsthand that sometimes being a guest on a podcast for the first time can
Mhm.
be a little intimidating. So when you're working with your clients and they bump into that crisis of confidence, how do you get them over that? How can someone who's new to podcast guesting get out of that zone of maybe this isn't for me, this feels a little uncomfortable?
Sure. I think that the first thing that most people have to understand is that so much of our lack of confidence around our messaging comes from a lot of different things, right? Imposter syndrome is a real thing, particularly for business owners. This idea that you're like, I feel like I'm just faking it. I'm out here just making it up as I go along. And that's a fair thing because you probably are. If you are a business owner, you are creating something new that somebody's never created before. Even if you're creating a burger shack, nobody's ever created quite that burger shack. You're probably doing it slightly differently, or you would have bought into a franchise or something. And so it's perfectly fine to have these feelings. And there are psychological tools that we can use to help us overcome these mental challenges. Beside that, though, the biggest problem that most people have when they get out and they want to speak on a stage, they want to get on camera, on the mic with a podcast, is that they worry about their message being broadly appealing. We
Mhm.
all want to be liked, right? We evolved as social animals to, if people in our tribe and our little village didn't like us and ostracized us and shunned us of the village, we didn't survive. So the people that we're descended from are the ones that understood that they needed to make sure everybody liked them or as many people like them as possible. The problem with that is that you bring that to something like a podcast and it actually works against you. You have to understand that when you are going on a show, when you're getting on a stage, when you're writing for your newsletter, whatever you're doing, you're speaking to a very select group of people. You're speaking to not only the people that are interested in what you're doing, but are interested in hiring you now or in the very near future. Otherwise, they're not really your ideal audience. Okay. And most people don't get that. I learned it at a very young age, or had an epiphany later in life about something that I had learned at a very young age and forgotten about. And when I was young, I'm dating myself, I was born in the early 70s. And by the time I was towards the end of grade school, truckers were the biggest thing. All Hollywood like movies were Smoking the Bandit, Any Which Way But Loose, Convoy, Trucker. Truckers were huge. Big rig trucks were huge. My best friend Keith and I were obsessed with big rig trucks. Keith liked Peterbilt. I liked Mack. I still think that I was right about that one. But we would argue about this stuff all the time. And whenever we would get a chance, we would pack ourselves peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, bologna and cheese, some Capri Sun juice boxes, and we'd jump on our bikes and we'd ride on down to the local rural route where the trucks would come by. And we would stand there. Keith would always wear his John Deere trucker cap, and I had this old my uncle's old Vietnam War helmet that you couldn't even see my eyes. It was so big on me. And we'd stand there by the side of the highway, pumping our fists to get the truckers to blow their air horns at us. And oh my God, we were just in heaven every time that a trucker would blow their air horn. Now, if you think about it, though, if you're familiar with rural routes at all, sure, there's a lot of truck traffic, but there's way more car traffic, pickup truck traffic, van traffic. It was the 70s, early 80s, station wagon traffic, right? And station wagons don't have air horns, but we just kept pumping our fists because we weren't talking to the station wagons. We were talking to the trucker behind the station wagon. We didn't worry about what the station wagon was thinking about us pumping our fists. And later in life, I realized, hey, this is a trap that I'm falling into. I'm out here trying to get track trailers to honk their horns for me, and I'm worrying about what the guy or the woman in the station wagon is going to think. Are they going to relate to what do they think when I'm doing this? And I realized that my content, whether it was a story I was telling on a stage, whether it was something that I was writing in my social media outreach, that it was not nearly as strong as it could possibly be because I was busy trying to speak to all the vehicles on the road, not just to the big rigs that had the air horns that I wanted to blow. And one of the things that I really try to drill into people that work with me is that you've got to get clear on who it is that you really want to be speaking to. And then you have to get really comfortable. It can be uncomfortable at first, but you have to get really uncomfortable looking stupid in your Vietnam era helmet, pumping your arm, because you're going to look like a weirdo to a lot of people out there. But that's fine. Those people weren't going to buy from you anyway. They weren't your audience. And if they're turned off by what you're doing, that's actually not a flaw. That's a feature of what you're doing, right? You don't want your email list full of people who are never going to buy. You don't want your social media channel full of people that aren't really going to resonate with your message. You want to be speaking in a way that really attracts the people that you're speaking to and frankly repels, not in a mean way or an insulting way, but just drives away the people that aren't interested in you. And you can't worry about the fact that you turn those people off.
I love that story because exactly in your child brain, right? When you're a little boy, you're not even thinking about it. You're like, those aren't my people. That station wagon doesn't matter to me. That van doesn't matter to me. I don't care what they think of me. I'm worried about the Mack truck over here.
It doesn't occur to you to even worry about them. You're just dancing around every time the air horn goes off. And it never crosses your mind to worry about the other vehicles.
But it's such a great invitation to actually get back in touch with that childlike freeness of saying, okay, these are my people. This is who I stand for. This is who I stand with. This is who I speak to. And I'm going to fully embrace that instead of feeling limited or closed in or hampered by saying, oh, how is that going to sound to this other group? Because the other group, like you said, it's not so much that your personal brand has to be divisive, right? Because there are certain brands that work that way, right? Some people love developing that controversy, divisiveness, right? That's part of or an element of a personal brand. But if that's not necessarily the type of personal brand you're developing, it's still okay for someone to come across your content and say, oh, interesting, but not for me. And that's okay. Like you said, that's actually a positive thing. And you know that you're doing something right.
We had a conversation with a woman on LinkedIn the other day, back and forth in the comments. And she was polling her followers about what topics they would like to see her writing about. And I responded and I said, I totally get what you're doing. I do it all the time. It's nice to hear back from your followers what they would like to hear, because then you can write about some of that and you'll probably get a lot of likes and a lot of comments, and that feels real good. I said, I don't really think that's the question you want to be asking, because your followers are probably not your ideal clients. And it clearly rubbed her the wrong way. She wrote back and she's like, why are you assuming? I don't want to make her tone, because we had a very civil exchange, but she wrote back and she's like, I respectfully disagree. Why would you assume that blah, blah, blah? I'm very strategic about the group that I've put together here, and so on and so forth. And I just responded and said, look, you have a large following, but there's a billion people on LinkedIn. There's way more of your ideal audience outside your ideal clients, outside your audience, than inside your audience. Mm-hmm. And the people inside your audience that aren't already clients, yeah, there are people that will someday become your clients, probably, but there are also just people that like you, that are in the same industry as you, that enjoy your sense of humor, that you vibe with and you interact with on LinkedIn. And what they like and what they want to see you write about is not necessarily what your ideal client needs to hear. And what you want to be writing about is what your ideal client needs to hear. And that may not, in fact, get you as many likes and as many like attaboys or attagirls as the content that your ideal client needs to hear. And so we went back and forth a little bit, and then eventually it was like we came to a consensus and it was all good. But I think a lot of people miss that. They miss that point that you're looking to talk to a very select group of people, and that their concerns are not necessarily the average person's concerns, right? You take it from, I want to talk to people that are guesting on podcasts regularly, and they look at it as something that's important for them, and very easy for people to go on 40 or more podcast episodes a year. If you were if you were speaking at 40 conferences a year, you would have a public speaking coach. Nobody would do that. Nobody would invest in that way unless they were already like very good at it, right? And so anyway, I want to be speaking to the people that realize that, and realize if I'm going to invest the time and the effort, then I want to get some help at it, and I want to get better and better at it. And that's a narrow, or I want to talk to people that are thinking about doing that. But that's a narrow slice of people. There's all kinds of other people in my following, in your following, right, that might go on a show or two, might be thinking about it, but are never going to do it. And if I try to market towards that group of people, my people are not going to understand that I'm for them, that this is what I'm laser focused on.
Yeah.
And look, this is what I do for a living. This is what you have me talking about as an expert. And I have to constantly be keeping myself in check from not broadening the message, or not seeing somebody else getting great traction. And man, everybody's talking about AI, and I'm passionate about AI. Maybe I should talk about AI for a while. It's okay, but I'm not teaching AI. I'm not like
that's not the
clients.
attractor you want to put out there. Exactly.
Correct. That's not my bait. I need to select a different lure. I need something else.
But I think you brought up something really interesting earlier, is that this is like hardwired in us, right? So my undergrad at Princeton was ecology and evolutionary biology. And so I think that's why I love marketing, is because at the core of why I liked biology and why I like marketing is it's all about why people do the things they do, why we function in the ways we do. And this desire to be liked, this desire, if you are a business owner, if you are a personal brand, if you are showing up and creating content, to have what you're putting out there validated and is hardwired. So it makes sense that even as a professional, and I do appreciate you saying that, because I think that makes a lot of people listening to this and hearing this feel a lot better, a little sigh of relief that, oh, okay, even professionals have to practice with this. This is not something that obviously one day we just flip a switch, however you say that. And we're like, oh, no, now we are perfect at this. It's a practice. We have to remind ourselves that it's okay. We might have a post that goes out there. And I'm sure I've had the experience where I've put a post out. maybe 2 or 3 likes, maybe a comment or two. Maybe those people have the same last name as me. Who knows? But
Right.
I actually had someone who I had a very low performing post, and I had 2 people directly message me, didn't even comment, didn't
Mhm.
even like post, and ask me to keynote, right? So asked me to keynote opportunities. So one of my lowest performing posts ended up getting me paid as opposed to just getting me liked, which I think is the point.
Not to get too deeply into social media strategy, LinkedIn strategy or something, because I think I'm pretty good at it, but that I'm not the expert at that. But yeah, I have a lot of LinkedIn friends that some of them are highly paid LinkedIn experts and coaches. And I talk about this stuff. It's another AI I'm interested in, like getting better at LinkedIn I'm interested in. So it's undoubtedly true. Most of the coaches that I've spoken to will be quite frank about the ones that get all the reach and maybe go viral and stuff like that's those are great for helping to build your follower and build your brand and so on and so forth, and you should have some of those. You should be shooting for that, but you need to have a solid core. More than 50% probably of your content should be posts that might not perform all that well, but really speak to what you offer, why your offer is different from other people's offers, why what you're doing can really move the needle for your particular audience. And yeah, like you said, people that are sitting there thinking, oh God, I really need help with this. I'm really struggling with this. Maybe for ego reasons, they're not likely to jump on the post and be like, love, share. Oh, I struggle with this. I'm totally failing at this. They're going to get into your DMs and say, thank you. I need help. Let's talk about this.
Yes.
And that content is completely different. It's one of the reasons why I am so bullish. I'm so excited and such a like an evangelist of podcasting, because it allows you to speak to a very focused audience. It allows you to spend a lot of time with that very focused audience. And then it allows you, some shows don't allow it, but most shows are going to say, hey, how can people get in touch with you? Do you have a book? Do you have a whatever? And it allows you to drive people into your audience, whether that be your email, whether that be a social media channel that you want to send them to, where you can continue that kind of slow drip. Maybe you're not knocking it out of the posts aren't knocking it out of the park, just like we pass a Coca-Cola billboard a whole bunch of times and then there we are buying a Coca-Cola.
Exactly.
Enough of those posts could get put in front of our audience and then they're going to jump on the offer that we make.
I love that nudge, that nurture, that nudging that we're doing. So I
Yeah.
know this is something that you work with people on, which is great. So now we're getting over that maybe confidence gap. We're getting into that role as a podcast guest, but you can't just show up and wing it, right? There needs to be some stories that you're thinking about developing. So when you're seeing people at this stage where they're now, okay, I'm doing this, or maybe the part of the group, like you were saying before, I've been doing podcast guesting, but it's not necessarily, there's something missing from my approach to it. How do you help people start becoming more engaging? How do you help them think about what they should be sharing when they're a podcast guest?
Yeah. For me, being a good podcast guest is about it's a lot of things. One, the very first thing is do your research on the show, right? There's some basics, but I think a lot of people don't do them. They wing it, maybe because they're more used to public speaking. And if you get asked to speak in front of a large group, you're probably a member of that group, or you have maybe more of a built-in understanding of who that audience is. Then they, of course, are doing their research as well, right? But if you're going on a lot of shows are different, the hosts are different, the topics are different, the audience responds differently. You need to get into the comments on the individual episodes. What did the audience like about this? What's resonating? If you want to be good at this, it's no different than, think about professional baseball player. The greatest professional baseball hitter on each of the 30 teams, they don't just sit around all day and say, I'm a great hitter, I can hit all day. Those people are working with their batting coaches, they're working with their fellow teammates, and on the off season, they're hiring other professional hitting coaches to keep when they just hit all day, practice all day long in the cage, not all day long. They have other things, they have things in their life, but they don't rest on the laurels. They're refining their craft. They're trying to go from batting 386 to batting 387, right? They want to keep getting better. And one of the things, if you're going to go on a show, you want to keep getting better at it. So you want to do your research, you want to do your prep. Another thing that I think people really need to work on is not just prep in terms of the research, but prep in terms of actually prepping what you're going to say. Not so that you've written it out on cards or something and you're going to read it and sound very stiff. I've seen people do that. It's terrible. I've gone on shows where the host has 3, 4, 5 questions that they ask every guest at the beginning of the show or at the end of the show, right? And sometimes in those questions can be questions that are great for you, or they can be questions that really absolutely do nothing for you as the guest. They don't really help you to shine. They don't help you to showcase your offering, your skills, right? So one of the things that I work with people in my programs is, okay, when you get these questions, you have to figure out, is it possible for me to relate this question to my topic? If it's not, how can I answer this question as quickly as possible, but still in a way that's like relatable, charming, whatever. But how can I answer it quickly and get on to the next one? Because maybe it's the next one I can tie in. And put together a one sheet at one point. It was actually a one sheet. I put together a PDF. It was multiple pages. And I came up with this example of a woman. She was a coach for people that owned yoga studios. This is my fictitious business owner. And she's on a show, and the host is, oh, hey, I forget the name that I give her. We'll call her Julie. Hey, Julie, I see that you live in Wisconsin. I grew up in Southern California. I can't imagine what it's like in Wisconsin right now. It's the winter. It must be blah, 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 or something like that, right? This does nothing for the show. It does nothing for the audience. It does nothing, right? But a lot of shows open this way. And so I said, okay, so what Julie needs to do is say, yeah, I grew up in Wisconsin. It's lovely. I love it here. And growing up, one thing that I learned, anybody growing up in Wisconsin learns, you've got to have a lot of different hats. You've got to have your ice fishing hat. You've got to have your cheesehead hat for when you see the Packers. You've got to have your hat for the summers when it's sunny because it gets real hot. And then that's why I work with my yoga studio owners and help them, because they've got to wear a lot of hats. They've got to do marketing. They've got to do payroll. They've got to do whatever, right? It's a clunky example, but the point is you got to figure out how to take those questions and move them in a way that really allows you to highlight what you're doing. And that's true of the whole run of the show. People need to take more control of the show and feel leads the show with them. I get asked questions all the time, say, that's a great question, and I'll answer it, but I just want to finish up on what we were saying about this thing, or I want to circle back to something that we didn't get to touch on, but that I thought was really interesting. And then I'll talk about the thing that is really important to me that I think is going to provide the most value to the audience. And then I'll answer what the host asked me, because I'm not rude. It's the host show. And if the host asked it, they probably think that there's value in it. And there probably is, right? But I'm not going to say, oh, I guess I don't get to talk about this important thing. I'm the guest, you're the host. We're working together to make this as valuable as we can for the audience. And I think it's important for guests to keep that front of mind and be active and not passive in their guesting approach.
I like that. So hopefully you guys have your sticky notes out, because if you know this show, I'm making you write down your sticky note writer downers. But what you just said, Seth, I want people to write down. Be active podcast guests, not passive participants. Because I'd agree with you. I've been a guest, I've been a host, and the best guests I always think are the ones who stand in their expertise, right? You're here for a reason because you have knowledge to share. You have gold nuggets you're going to be dropping. And I may not know as much about that area or that thing as you if I'm the host. That's why you're here. And for me, that limits my ability to maybe ask the right questions. I do my best, but if what I'm hearing you say is to those folks that are watching and listening to this, if you are a guest and you are standing in your zone of genius and your host asks you a question that doesn't tee up perfectly a story or a lesson or something that you were planning to talk about, it's about building the bridge. It's about saying, okay, they may not know enough to ask me the perfect tee up question, right? They may be in their own zone of genius, right? They may have their own space and therefore they didn't ask the question quite right for me. But how can I build the bridge from what they actually asked to what I actually want to say? So there's that kind of co-creation approach as a podcast guest. I think that's a really important thing for people to think about.
Yeah, if you're a nutritionist and you work with your clients on the keto diet, or you don't work with your clients, that's a better example. You don't like the keto diet and you get on the show and the host is keto's all the rage. What do you think about keto? You could spend your time talking about why you don't like keto, but that's not selling what you like. So again, it's you lead it where it needs to go. You say, hey, yeah, keto's popular and it works great for a lot of people. I find that my clients do better on the Mediterranean diet or whatever it is that you work with. And then you start talking about the Mediterranean diet. You don't talk about the keto diet, even
Yeah.
though that's the question that your host keyed up. And your host isn't going to finish the episode and say, hey, thanks, Seth. We're out. Thanks very much. And then when the recording stops, say, dare you answer the question about keto, right? That's not the way that it works. And we don't have to worry that's going to happen. That's just maybe if the person's having a horrible day or something. I don't know. But that's just, it's never happened to me. And I guest on a show practically every week and have for quite some time.
No, I love that. Now, I know one of the other things that you really are passionate about, as am I, is storytelling. And so I'd love to just, as we're talking about redirecting potentially certain questions that don't fit what you're looking to impart as a podcast guest, how can you also prepare some stories? How can you take and develop a set of stories to bring with you? How do you do that for yourself? How do you help your clients do that?
Sure. I have a program in which it's called the Authentic Story Academy. And this is something that we work on a lot. A lot of the front end of the program works on this very thing. And oddly enough, it's going to be, you teed me up in such a way. I thought you were leading me somewhere where I was going to be like, wait, but I'd rather answer this other question first and demonstrate what we were just talking about. But it actually melds together perfectly because I have this technique that actually does two things, right? It helps you figure out the stories that you're going to tell, and it helps you figure out how to transition from one thing to another thing. There's a few parts to it. So the first thing you have to do is you have to start keeping a story journal, okay? Because one big thing that holds people back from storytelling, holds people back from going on podcasts and stages and stuff like that, is because they look at stories the wrong way. I think partially because we read these New York Times bestsellers written by somebody that climbed Mount Everest and had to chop their leg off, but still made it to the top and then came down and saved four children along the way. And it was like, oh my God, this is an amazing story. And then they teach you how this relates to like making cold calls or something like that. And we're
Right.
like, yes, this is how people tell stories, right? And yes, people can tell those stories if you have that story, but most of us don't have a story like that. Most of us aren't Olympians. We didn't lead the special forces in Kandahar or whatever the latest business book is. What we have done is we picked up our kids at school. We went to the grocery store. We went out on a date with our spouse, whatever the case may be. We had something weird happen to us on the way to work or on the way back from lunch. And we tell these stories to our coworkers when we get into the office. If we go into the office, we tell them to our friends. We pick up the phone. We call our loved ones, our parents. We tell our spouses when we get home or our kids or whatever. We have stories that we tell all day long. And somehow we begin to think that those aren't good enough stories, right? I started this episode with a story about me as a little kid, like trying to get truckers to honk their horns for me, right? That's not like, I've told that story so many times and had the host be like, I did that as a kid, right? It's a totally relatable story. It's not unusual at all. We have these things happen in our day all the time. And so you keep a story journal and you write down the stories. I gave my daughter a cookbook. It was illustrated by a professional comic book illustrator. She loves comic books. She loves cooking. She went berserk. She brought it to school for the next week and she bought new copies to give to her friends. All right. I wrote that down. I actually spent more time talking about it than normally I would. Jot down, bought daughter cookbook. She brought it to school. Her friends loved it. That's it. That's what you put in your story journal. Dropped off my daughter at school, driving home, saw 3 balloons perfectly like flying in formation, wanted to get a shot. By the time I could pull over and take the picture, the angle had changed, didn't work out, whatever. Okay, there's your story, right? You write down all these stories, and once a week or so, you go through your list. And is there anything here that I can make relate to my business? Now, the 2 that I just suggested, the story about my daughter in the cookbook, I use that story to tell people that you need to stick to your voice. The woman who wrote the cookbook, she didn't hire somebody to illustrate it. She's the illustrator. The body of her work is all in graphic novels, Hollywood animated films, but she put out a Korean cookbook because she's of Korean descent. Had she put out a normal cookbook with photos and stuff like that, my daughter wouldn't have been bringing it to school. She stuck to her guns, to her voice, and it really resonated with a certain segment of the audience. The balloons flying in formation I used to illustrate the fact that certain things in storytelling have to work together and if they don't work together, just like when I turned the corner and pulled over and I looked at it from a different angle, it didn't come together. You can use these stories in a way that illustrate the points that you need them to make. And then there's going to be a whole bunch of stories that just don't work or they don't work yet. Okay. Now, the next thing that you do is you make a whole list. And if you're having a trouble with it, if you use ChatGPT at all and you use it to ideate, or maybe you put the pieces that you write in it to say, help me write a hook or edit this for me or something. If it's got a body of your work so it understands what you do, you can ask it, give me 30 topics that I could talk about. But they don't have to be the best topics, right? You get your 30 topics. You do it yourself. You get ChatGPT, any AI, Claude, whatever, to do it for you. And then you have a random number generator, pick one from column A, one from column B. Now, your job is to make story seed A align with business topic B. And the more you practice this, the more often you'll see that you can make 2 seemingly totally unrelated things come together. Sometimes they come together really well. Sometimes in having to force them together, it's really funny, and that's fun too. But what it does is it helps us understand that we have these stories in our life. And the more that you start practicing, the easier it becomes, the more of the stories you remember at the end of the day, the story seeds to put into your journal. And the nice thing about it is that practice also helps you with that kind of like the host asks you A and you want to talk about B, because you spend some time, half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour, or whatever, every week trying to make 2 things fit together. Anything we ask our brain to do, it gets better at it. It starts laying down new neural pathways. And pretty soon you get much more agile, much more nimble at making those transitions, because shout out back to the baseball player, you're in the cage doing it over and over again. And the more you do it, the better you'll get at it.
I love that exercise. First of all, hopefully everyone is writing down on their sticky notes, story journal, right? Assignment from today, story journal. I love that idea. But I like that exercise because I completely agree, right? The more we're doing something, more at bats you get. You're doing these repetitions, right. It becomes muscle memory. You're getting used to putting these 2 things together. Here's what I want them to learn, or here's the lesson. Here's a seemingly mundane but memorable story, right? Connecting story, that little exercise. So hopefully everyone is capturing that on their sticky note. It reminded me of, in one of my marketing workshops that I teach, I do a little energizer activity where I have half the room write down on a sticky note their favorite new product or service. And then the other half of the room has to write down a problem that they're having. So in silence, everyone writes this down. And I then make them pitch, right? So the product people are walking around with their product and the people with the problems are trying to match. And it's similar to the lesson in the story in that sometimes you end up, everyone gets matched except for a couple of things that don't go together, right? So I remember one was a shopping app that that helps you pick food items that have healthy ingredients, right? The least toxic ingredients. That was the product that the woman had put on her sticky note. And another woman had a
I like where this is
problem.
going.
Yeah, which was, oh, I can't get my kids to bed in time. And so all of a sudden she's, okay, these things don't go, they don't go. And so finally they switched the way they were thinking, how do we
Well,
get them to go? And all of a sudden they came to the conclusion that, oh, if they're eating less junk, they'll get to bed easily. So it's about finding these little shifts in how we can actually use. I like it. You opened, like you said, today a story about getting some truckers to honk their horns, but yet connected that to a core important lesson about business. So,
yeah, at the risk of tooting my own horn, blowing my own air
pun
horn, but I'm going to do it
intended.
anyway. It's so funny how often people come to me like you just did. And you were like, there were these two things that didn't go together. And I'm like, oh, but they go together so well. I go together so well. The more that you do it, the more you're able to think outside the box. That I came up with the exact same thing that as soon as you said it, I was like, but healthy eating is going to help them be not like jazzed at bedtime or not tired earlier in the day so that they nap and then they're jazzed at bedtime or whatever. I'm like, it's so obvious, but right. But if you're not spending your time looking for these things, it's not that easy. It's not obvious, but I work at it a lot.
Yeah, you've been doing the mental workout. So that's exactly
Right.
it. I like that. Seth, I know we've given people a very full sticky note coming out of today. Is there
It's,
anything that we haven't covered that you would like to make sure that the audience has as their reminder, their gold nugget to be able to take with them today?
yeah, the gold nugget is going to be just to remember the power of storytelling, right? And remember that it's important in story to be relatable. And those everyday things make you really relatable. And in those everyday stories, it's the little details also that make you relatable, right? So I'm going to say that I haven't been keeping real track of the time and I'm not wearing my glasses, so I can't read my clock. But half an hour ago, 40 minutes ago, whatever, I told a story about the truckers, right? Now, I'm going to bet that you, the audience, remember what my friend's name was. You probably remember what we packed for lunch, or at least part of what we packed for lunch. You probably remember something about what my friend was wearing, what I was wearing. You remember all these details, and none of those details were important to the core lesson of the story, or even the core. I could have told a story about getting truckers to blow the air horn and included none of that. But speaking to you, Mary, directly, I mean, you were like smiling and nodding your head and laughing at certain points, right? It made the story much more kind of emotionally connective and relatable and memorable. It's things that these details that cause us to have emotional reactions. And it's the emotional reactions that cause us to code the information into our brain at a much, I'm not going to bore you with the details. MRI studies have been done, right? Where they actually can see when the emotional part of the brain is firing, then the part of the brain that's laying down new memories goes into overdrive and so on and so forth. So it's those little details that matter. Now, yes, you have to work within a certain constraint. If you've got 2 or 3 minutes to tell the story, you have to make sure that the story fits within the 2 or 3 minutes. But don't drop out those little seemingly like inconsequential details of the story, because those are what really helps your audience to connect with the story and to connect with you and get to know you a little bit and get to like you better, because they're like, oh yeah, I had peanut butter and jelly and bologna and cheese. I had a John Deere trucker cap, right? That's what I would close with. I would say just remember the little details. They're there for a reason. Learn how to get better at using them, and your stories are going to be a lot better, and that's going to lead to a lot more connection. That's going to lead to people taking, when you give the call to action, when you say, hey, come download my thing or whatever at the end of your post, at the end of your podcast episode, more people are going to follow you down that path.
I love that. So when their goal is to connect with that in particular audience, the truckers, not the station
Not the
station
station
wagon
wagons.
drivers, Don't ditch
Station
the
wagons don't
details.
have air horns.
Yeah, don't ditch the details. Remember the details. Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Seth. I really appreciate it. I know there are folks here that light bulbs are going off. They've got questions. They want to follow up with you. Where is the best place for folks to connect with you?
Yeah, the best place to find me is on LinkedIn. My name, thankfully, is unique enough. I'm Seth Donlin. That's it. You can put Seth Donlin in there. You're going to find me. And yeah, please come see me there. I would love to offer the audience, those who are going on podcasts, those who are thinking about going on podcasts. I have a free podcast audit that I would love if anybody came and avail themselves of. You can, again, you can reach me through LinkedIn, get into the DM, tell me you want a podcast guest audit. And what you can do is just send me a link to whatever show you were on. I will watch or listen and or watch the show, and I will give you a written kind of feedback on the things you're doing well, the things that you can improve on, and a little bit of a real short Loom video to tie it all together. And that's free and hopefully will be helpful.
Amazing. Thank you, Seth. That's incredibly generous. Everyone, definitely please take Seth up on that. We'll include his LinkedIn connection link here wherever you're watching or listening to this episode. Thank you again, Seth, for being our guest expert today and sharing your wisdom when it comes to being a great storyteller and effective podcast guest.
Thanks, Mary. I had a great time. I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you all for watching and listening to this episode, joining us here on the Sticky Note Marketing Show. Excited to have you here and invite you to reach out to me and my team. Let us know, drop in the comments wherever you're watching or listening to this. What topics do you want to hear more about? What guest experts would you like us to feature? What's that? 5 stars? Yes, give it 5 stars. Yes, comments, ratings, reviews, always appreciated. And we'll see you on the next episode of the Sticky Note Marketing Show. Cheers.